none of because of combat. So that's why I'm a little out of place sitting here. I'm not a veteran who was involved in any kind of war. I never shot at anybody, and nobody ever shot at me. So, because I was 14, going on 14 when the war was over, so I was never involved. We didn't go to Korea. The Korean War had kind of stopped in the middle of 53, and we didn't get our wings till October of 53. The Americans who graduated practically all went to Nellis Air Force Base to get checked out on F-86s, and practically all of them went over to Korea in F-86s. We, foreign students, we went through F-84s and back home. So I was never involved in combat. But jet engines and jet planes were so new that we had more accident than you can shake a stick at, and 11 of my buddies over a period of a few years crashed and died, and we buried them. Mostly, just like it is now, mostly pilot error. Some mechanical problems, but misinterpreted. Mostly pilot error. But I personally never had a major problem. I only had to make an emergency landing twice. I had never, in 54 years of flying, never made a bad landing. So I'm hardly in place here as a combat veteran because I never had any such problems.
You served as an apprentice, if you will, of trying out, learning the new planes and learning how to operate and being prepared in case.
Oh, I did want to go to Korea. I volunteered several times. But the Royal Netherlands Air Force said, in the first place, they didn't have a contingent in Korea. The Dutch that were there were attached to a British contingent. But when we applied for Korea, they said, no, you first have to come back to Holland and be trained. They acted like the American training wasn't good enough. And they weren't kidding. They put us through 3-4 more months of training in Holland before we were considered combat ready. And I must admit, we needed the training. It was good for us, but we never got into action because the Korean War was over, and that was it.
And then you eventually came back to the United States.
In '57, I came back as an immigrant, and have been here ever since, and I'm obviously still here. Yeah, when I got out of the service in Holland, just about all of my buddies went to airlines. KLM, Martin Air started up, Lufthansa started up, Swiss Air, because it was the beginning of the jet age. The commercial jets started flying at 59, and every airliner wanted people with jet experience. But I was not the best of military guys. If I hadn't left the service, they would probably have kicked me out. And I never wanted to wear another uniform. I never wanted to say yes sir or no sir to nobody. And that's why I didn't join any airlines or what have you, even though we were in demand.
But you did get your commercial and instructor's ratings.
Yes, but all private, and I didn't get into a uniform till much later. When my son was starting college, I heard about the Civil Air Patrol. And I had taught my son, I had my own plane by then, I taught my son to fly since he was 9 years old. A couple of phone books under his butt and a pillow behind his back, and by the time he was 15, he soloed. And I taught him. And I thought he could put in more time with the Civil Air Patrol, and I went to talk to him, and they needed me. They needed somebody with an instructor's rating because the pilots have to be checked every year. They needed a check pilot with an instructor's rating. So guess what? I got back in the uniform, and I did a lot of flying. Never got paid a cent, but I had a good time flying around and checking these various people and going on different rescue missions. But all in good fun.
It's different when it's an auxiliary and you're a volunteer, and
yeah,
isn't it? And all of your experience led you to write another book called The Fun of Flying. Tell us about that for just a moment.
The Fun of Flying is a little R-rated.
Imagine that.
Because you're going to wonder what was most important to us: learning how to fly, chasing girls, partying, or chasing girls, or learning how to fly, or drinking, or chasing girls, or all of the above. Man, we had a ball. The experience of being sent to the United States for training, coast to coast, stationed in North Carolina, Texas, and Arizona, was generally a ball. And we had only two things on our mind, flying and chasing girls. And I couldn't think of anything better to do. And that's what this is about. And it's a fun book.
Well, you were in your early 20s, so I would say
you'll laugh a lot when you read this book.
Anything else that you want to mention? You've obviously had quite a different experience and perspective than many other veterans that have been interviewed for this program. But it's still an important part of the story to tell, don't you think?
Yeah, our experience during the war was interesting for more than one reason. We had German soldiers in the house at all time, and people ask me frequently, what were German soldiers like? They were like American soldiers. They came in the bar to drink and eat and dance and sing along with the records. Ordinary guys. The Nazis, the fanatics, those were the problem. The ordinary German soldier, they would rather have been home with their wife and kids rather than be in this lousy war. So that was one good experience, learning the difference between an ordinary soldier and a real Nazi. And then later on, after the war, we had lost our house. We lost everything. I should go back to that and explain that. We had two British soldiers in the house for 7 days. These fellows had not been out of their clothes for 9 days straight. Fighting and moving and fighting and moving. They'd crossed the Rhine and Patton, and the Americans continued further east, and the British swung to the north, and they came into Holland from the east. And these guys had been on the go constantly for 9 days straight. And my mom learned one English word when she washed their underwear and towels. She would say, nice, and they'd say, nice, Mrs. Ford, nice. It's the only English word she ever learned. But we learned from those guys what it's like to be a foot soldier. And right outside our town, 9 British tanks were clobbered, so several British soldiers got killed right outside of town, but we left town. The fighting went around the town instead of through the town. It could have been a lot worse. If we had had door-to-door fighting, we would have been in bad shape. But the reason why we were not in our original house, in the fall of '44, all of a sudden, a German staff car came into the backyard, and a German engineer, Herr Hauptmann, and his staff, including a young girlfriend, came into the restaurant, and they told my parents, "Sitzen Sie sich, sit down, and from now on in, if you take over the restaurant, you will be closed to the public. We will put straw on the floor, all the furniture has to go out. We take over the rooms upstairs, and we will put Russian and Polish prisoners of war in here. We will cook for you, we'll bring the food, and the good news is we will bring a generator, and you will have electricity again." What are you going to do? For 6 months, we had German soldiers in the house, sleeping upstairs, and Polish and Russian prisoners of war sleeping on the floor, on straw, in the restaurant, what used to be the restaurant. And the good thing about it was, while all of Holland was starving to death, we had food. We had to cook for all these people. My mom and a big fat Obergefreiter, like a sergeant major, he was the cook. They worked in the kitchen, and they had to feed everybody. So we had food, we had electricity. We had it made in compared to the rest of Holland, because some 90,000 people died of hunger in Holland after September of '44, when they didn't get that bridge too far. Well, we had food, but then in February, early February of '45, my father got into an argument with Herr Hauptmann somewhere in the restaurant, and the conversation went a little bit like this. My father said, "You wait a few more weeks and the Americans will be here and they'll get your butt." And Herr Hauptmann said, "Hey, you won't live to see that." And he pulled his pistol out and he was going to shoot my father right on the spot. My mom jumped in between, got it all settled, but my dad was arrested and carted off. And my mother, who grew up right on the border, spoke German fluently. She went to one headquarters after the other, or